With her last $1,800 clutched in trembling fingers and a foreclosure notice crumpled in her pocket, Morgan Foster watched in stunned silence as the contractor's crowbar pried loose the rotting floorboards of the abandoned barn she had desperately purchased at a county auction. Beneath the decaying wood lay the entrance to a narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with century-old timber supports leading to a hidden cave containing 3 wooden chests filled with gold coins, silver bars, and faded banknotes estimated at $3 million, the legendary lost treasure of notorious outlaw Jesse McBride. Documents that would soon bring museum curators and Wild West historians to her crumbling property with proposals that would transform her desperate last stand into an unexpected second chance at life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The relentless summer heat poured through the broken windows of the dilapidated barn as Morgan Foster surveyed the damage assessment spread across what had once been a sturdy workbench. At 38, the deepening worry lines etched around her eyes and the premature silver threading through her once chocolate brown hair told the story of a woman who had weathered an impossible year. Despite the exhaustion that seemed to hang from her shoulders like a physical weight, her eyes still flickered with a quiet determination that had become her only constant companion. "The entire roof needs to be replaced," she said, tracing her finger along the red-marked areas of the inspector's report, "and the foundation has shifted significantly on the north side." Lucas Reeves, the contractor she had somehow convinced to look at the property, despite her obvious financial constraints, leaned against the weathered wall and studied the building plans. At 49, his sun-weathered face carried the deep lines earned from decades of renovating historic structures throughout Pinecrest County. "Supporting beams in the hayloft are completely compromised," he said, his voice rough from years of working around construction dust. "Renovation costs on a structure this old, especially with the water damage from years of neglect, will be astronomical." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Morgan?" The local radio station played quietly from Lucas's portable radio, the announcer's voice tight with excitement. Coming up next, Pinecrest's 150th Frontier Days celebration preparations are underway. Mayor Wilson promises this year's Outlaw reenactment will be the largest in county history. The once sturdy interior of the McBride barn, with its now warped plank flooring and damaged timber framing, had witnessed over a century of frontier history. A vintage saddle rack, missing several pegs and covered in dust, had once proudly displayed riding equipment during the barn's glory days. Today, it stood as a silent witness to Morgan's desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to rebuild her life after losing everything. Olivia Brennan, Morgan's closest friend since high school, entered from the back storeroom, dust-coating her practical canvas work pants. At 37, her practical ponytail and efficient movements spoke of someone who had learned to navigate life's challenges with pragmatic determination. "Electrical system is completely shot," she reported, accepting the bottle of water Morgan handed her. "And there's significant termite damage in the eastern corner. Those antique farm tools you were excited about might already be too damaged to salvage." Morgan's expression darkened. The vintage farming equipment with its hand-forged plows and wooden handles had been one of the features that convinced her to bid on the property despite her precarious finances. Now it was just one more piece of her fragile plan, threatened by the structure's extensive deterioration. Morgan moved to the front window, staring out at the quiet back road of Pinecrest, a small town that had once thrived, but now struggled to maintain its historic properties against the pull of interstate development and big-box stores. McBride barn had been deteriorating long before she discovered it. 6 years vacant after the death of its elderly owner, the once beloved landmark had fallen into severe disrepair. The auction price had been remarkably low, reflecting both the property's condition and the limited number of buyers willing to take on such a massive renovation project. The final foreclosure notice from her mortgage company had arrived 3 weeks ago, 30 days to vacate. After her bitter divorce 2 years earlier, the discovery of her ex-husband's hidden debts and the legal battle that followed had decimated her once comfortable life. The modest settlement that should have provided temporary security had instead gone to creditors, leaving Morgan with nothing but mounting bills and a shattered sense of stability. "The Johnson property sold last week," Olivia said quietly, sweeping dust from a corner shelf. "That corporate development group bought it. They're clearing the land next month." Lucas's jaw tightened. Vultures have been picking at every historic property in the county, tearing down a century of history for outlet stores and parking lots. The situation was painfully familiar in Pinecrest. Historic structures were disappearing one by one, replaced by generic commercial establishments that erased the town's unique architectural character. McBride Barn was one of the last untouched 19th century structures remaining, a distinction that brought more historical significance than financial value. "Westridge Development called again this morning," Olivia added reluctantly. "Offered to take the property off your hands before the repair costs make it worthless, as they put it. 30 cents on the dollar, I'm guessing," Morgan said bitterly. "Just enough to cover what I paid at auction, but not a penny for the historical significance or potential." The unspoken reality hung in the air. McBride Barn wasn't just a desperate investment. It had become Morgan's entire future plan. Every remaining dollar from her divorce settlement after the creditors took their share had gone into purchasing this crumbling structure. If she lost the barn, she lost everything: her investment, her housing plans, and her last chance at financial recovery for herself and her 11-year-old daughter Emma. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morgan reached for her work gloves hanging by the door. "I'll check the storeroom floor myself. Maybe we can salvage some of the original planks for the wings for the cones for restoration." "Not alone," Lucas insisted, grabbing his toolbox. "Those old floors can be treacherous. 2 sets of eyes spot dangers twice as fast." "This building has already cost you enough," Morgan protested softly. Lucas placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "You hired me for an assessment, Morgan. Consider this part of my professional obligation. Besides, I've been restoring historic buildings for 25 years. I didn't build this reputation by standing back when things got challenging." As they prepared to examine the storeroom more thoroughly, the radio announcer's voice rose with local pride. "Breaking news. The Pinecrest Historical Society announces a special exhibition on Outlaw Jesse McBride's lost treasure featuring newly discovered journal entries." Historians still debate whether the infamous McBride fortune from the 1880s train robbery exists. Morgan and Lucas exchanged curious glances. The outlaw history of Pinecrest was a point of local pride, with Jesse McBride's exploits having been established in the town during the tumultuous frontier days. "That's been the town's claim to fame for generations," Morgan said. "Every school child in Pinecrest learns about McBride's mysterious hidden fortune. Major tourist draw for the region," Lucas agreed. "I restored the windows in the Frontier Museum last year. Folks come from all over to see where the outlaw gang operated." Olivia handed them each a flashlight, her eyes reflecting concern she wouldn't voice. "That delivery truck knocked out another support beam down the road last week. Be careful where you step. There's probably broken glass from when this place was vandalized." As they stepped into the barn storeroom, the summer heat intensified. In the enclosed space, sunlight streamed through dust-covered windows, illuminating decades of neglect. Neither Morgan nor Lucas could have imagined how the next few hours would forever change the future of McBride Barn, and how a desperate effort To examine damaged flooring would uncover secrets that would reach all the way to the Smithsonian American History Museum. The ancient hinges protested as Morgan pushed open the warped door to the storeroom, Lucas following close behind, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The air grew warmer and mustier with each step, carrying the unmistakable scent of decades-old wood meeting unwelcome moisture. Previous owner must have attempted some renovation back here, Lucas observed as they entered the storeroom. These shelves aren't original to the building, added maybe 50, 60 years ago. Morgan's flashlight revealed a storeroom far larger than she had expected, stretching toward the back of the structure. Portions featured newer construction, while other sections revealed the original stone foundation and timber supports. Several floorboards were visibly damaged, warping upward as if pushed from below. Main water damage seems to be concentrated there, Lucas said, pointing toward the far corner where several floorboards had completely rotted away. Foundation shifting. Not surprising in a structure this old, especially with poor maintenance. The portable dehumidifier Morgan had hastily purchased and installed the previous day was struggling against the ambient moisture, its collection tank already half full. She checked the unit, confirming it was still operational. "We need to see how extensive the damage is," she acknowledged, frustrated by the seemingly endless problems, "and find the original foundation points." These old buildings usually had stone footers that might still be sound. They moved carefully across the uneven floor, inspecting the perimeter of the spacious storeroom. Lucas examined the construction with professional interest, occasionally stopping to point out features of the original craftsmanship or later modifications. "Stonework on these walls is exceptional," he noted, running his hand along a perfectly preserved section. "They don't build like this anymore. These foundations have stood for over 140 years. Morgan appreciated his evident respect for the property. In Lucas, she had found not just a contractor, but someone who understood the historical value of what she was trying to save. In the week since purchasing McBride Barn, most people had regarded her decision as either foolishly romantic or financially suicidal, perhaps both. As they reached the eastern corner of the storeroom, Morgan's flashlight beam caught something unusual, a section of flooring that appeared slightly different from the surrounding wood. "What's that?" she asked, moving closer. Lucas followed, his experienced eye immediately noticing what had caught her attention. "Different wood pattern," he said thoughtfully. "And look," he directed his flashlight toward a small gap between the boards where earlier water damage had caused the wood to separate. "The grain direction changes here." Morgan knelt down to examine the floor more carefully. A rectangular section approximately 3 feet across was visible, the floorboards running perpendicular to the surrounding flooring. Unlike the water-damaged sections elsewhere, these boards seemed to have been deliberately arranged. "There's something underneath," she said, excitement momentarily overriding her concern about the building's condition. "A trap door, maybe, or some kind of storage space." Lucas joined her, placing his hand against the unusual section of flooring. He pressed experimentally at different points, his decades of restoration work having taught him that old buildings often held secrets in their construction. To their mutual surprise, a section of flooring shifted slightly under pressure. "False floor," Lucas breathed, professional excitement evident in his voice. "Might be an old root cellar or maybe a Prohibition-era addition." He applied pressure. More deliberately, and with a grinding sound of wood against wood, the section began to give way. Lucas quickly retrieved a crowbar from his toolbox and carefully pried up the edge of what was now clearly a concealed trapdoor. As the section of flooring lifted away, their flashlight beams penetrated the darkness to reveal not a cellar, but what appeared to be the entrance to a narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with aged timber. "That's not just a storage cellar," Lucas stated unnecessarily, his flashlight joining Morgan's to illuminate the unexpected discovery. That's a deliberate tunnel. Morgan carefully aimed her light into the opening, revealing rough-hewn steps leading downward into darkness. The passage appeared to be approximately 3 feet wide and reinforced with wooden supports that had somehow withstood the test of time. Frontier-era construction, Lucas observed, examining the tunnel without entering it. Hand-cut timber, probably local pine work. Question is, where does it lead, and why was it built beneath a barn? Only one way to find out, Morgan said, her voice betraying both apprehension and curiosity. Lucas hesitated. We should be careful. Old tunnels can be structurally compromised. Let me go first. With careful movements, Lucas positioned himself at the tunnel entrance, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. Morgan followed close behind, her flashlight beam joining his to illuminate their descent. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, carrying the unmistakable earthy scent of underground spaces long undisturbed. The tunnel extended approximately 30 feet, gradually sloping downward before opening into a surprisingly spacious chamber that had been carved from the natural limestone beneath the property. Their flashlight beams revealed a room roughly 15 feet across, its ceiling supported by a combination of natural rock formations and carefully positioned timber braces. Against the far wall stood 3 wooden chests of varying sizes, their once polished surfaces now dulled with age but still intact. Scattered around them were several rusted metal tools, what appeared to be mining equipment, and a small writing desk with papers still visible on its surface. This is incredible, Morgan whispered, her light illuminating the unexpected underground chamber. A hidden room beneath my property. Lucas moved carefully around the perimeter, examining the construction with professional interest. This wasn't just thrown together. Someone put significant effort into creating this space. Proper ventilation channels there. He pointed to narrow shafts leading upward. Drainage system here. This was designed for long-term use. Morgan approached the largest of the wooden chests, finding it secured with a simple metal latch rather than a lock. With a deep breath, she carefully lifted the latch and opened the lid. Inside, protected from moisture and time by the well-designed underground space, lay stacks of gold coins, their surfaces tarnished but unmistakable, alongside several small bars of what appeared to be silver. "Oh my God," she breathed, looking at Lucas questioningly. His expression changed, eyes widening with realization. "Could be," he whispered. "The McBride treasure." Before he could complete his thought, a loud crash from the front of the barn interrupted the moment, the sound of a door slamming violently. "Hello," came a voice from the main room. "County Inspector. Anyone here?" "We've had reports of unauthorized construction work." Morgan and Lucas exchanged alarmed glances. "We need to secure this," Morgan said decisively, her mind racing with implications of their discovery. "Cover it up until we can properly examine it." Lucas nodded, already helping her close the chest and return to the tunnel entrance. "That treasure could be historically significant, Morgan, if it's authentic." McBride loot. They worked quickly, temporarily covering the hidden entrance with the loose floorboards before heading to the front of the barn to address the unexpected visitor. The discovery had added an unexpected dimension to Morgan's already complicated situation, transforming her impulsive purchase from merely a desperate financial gamble into something potentially far more significant. As they emerged from the storeroom, dusty and startled but trying to appear casual, they found not only the county inspector but Olivia engaged in conversation with him, her expression shifting rapidly from concern to protective defensiveness. "They're here now," she said to the inspector, eyes meeting Morgan's with a warning look. "As I mentioned, Miss Foster is the new owner and is simply assessing renovation needs with her contractor. No actual construction has begun." The county inspector, a thin man with a clipboard and an officious manner, turned to Morgan with evident skepticism. "Miss Foster, I'm Frank Dawson, county building inspector." We've received complaints about potential code violations and unauthorized structural work at this address." Morgan and Lucas exchanged puzzled glances. The timing seemed too precise to be coincidental. Someone had reported them within minutes of their discovery. Through the dusty front windows, Morgan noticed a black pickup truck parked across the road, its occupant watching the barn with evident interest. "How could anyone possibly know what we just found?" Morgan whispered to Lucas. "We only discovered it ourselves 5 minutes ago." Lucas's expression was grim. Historic properties like this attract attention, especially ones with connections to frontier figures. McBride Barn has been on preservationists' radar for decades. Before they could further discuss this alarming development, the bell above the door jangled again as 2 more visitors entered. A middle-aged woman in a tailored suit carrying a leather portfolio, and an older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful manner of an academic. "Miss Foster," the woman asked, her demeanor professional but urgent. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Marshall from the State Historical Preservation Office. This is Professor William Harlow from Pinecrest University's History Department. We need to speak with you immediately about what you've discovered beneath your storeroom floor." The summer heat continued to press against the building's windows, but for Morgan, the true pressure was just beginning, one that would connect her failing barn to outlaw secrets, national museums, and a historical mystery that had remained hidden for over 140 years. In the dusty front room of McBride Barn, surrounded by cobwebs and broken farm equipment, Morgan found herself facing officials who somehow knew about a discovery she had made mere minutes ago. "May we come in?" Dr. Marshall asked, though her tone suggested it wasn't really a question. "What we need to discuss is urgent and of significant historical interest." Morgan hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, though I should warn you, the building is in considerable disrepair. We're just beginning to assess the renovation needs." The visitors entered, their practiced eyes sweeping the deteriorating interior before focusing back on Morgan. "This is Lucas Reeves, my contractor," Morgan explained, gesturing to Lucas, who stood watching the exchange with careful neutrality, "and my friend Olivia Brennan." Professor Harlow, a slender man in his 60s with the stooped posture of someone who had spent decades bent over historical texts, spoke up. "Ms. Foster, we have reason to believe you've uncovered historically significant artifacts in this property, potentially containing Jesse McBride's missing fortune that has been sought by historians for generations." Morgan exchanged glances with Lucas, whose subtle nod confirmed her suspicion about the hidden chamber they had found. "A tunnel," she said quietly, "leading to an underground room." Dr. Marshall's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised by Morgan's forthrightness. "Yes, historical records indicate Jesse McBride constructed a series of hidden chambers and tunnels throughout this region after the famous Central Pacific train robbery of 1882. The loot, estimated at over $125,000 in gold and silver, approximately $3 million in today's value, disappeared after his gang was ambushed by lawmen. McBride Barn was built by the Outlaw's cousin, Ezekiel McBride," Lucas added, his knowledge of historical architecture extending to the properties he restored. He was officially a cattle rancher, but local legends claim he helped hide his infamous cousin on numerous occasions. The property stayed in the McBride family until 1938. Professor Harlow nodded appreciatively. "You know your local history, Mr. Reeves. What few people realize is that Jesse McBride entrusted certain valuables to his cousin for safekeeping. Items too risky to transport, but too valuable to abandon." Morgan processed this information, connecting it to their discovery. "The wooden chests we found, they contained gold coins and silver bars." "Precisely," Professor Harlow confirmed with barely contained excitement. "Jesse and Ezekiel created a secure hiding place here away from potential lawmen and rival gangs. They likely intended to retrieve the treasure after the heat died down, But Jesse was killed in a shootout in Colorado, and Ezekiel died before he could retrieve or reveal the location. Dr. Marshall stepped forward, her expression serious. Ms. Foster, those artifacts, if authentic, represent an extraordinary historical discovery. Their academic and historical value is immeasurable. Some may contain information that would completely revise our understanding of that pivotal period in frontier history. Morgan felt a defensive instinct rise. This discovery, this building, they represented her last chance at financial recovery. I understand the historical significance, but McBride Barn is my property. I purchased it legally, contents included. Of course, Dr. Marshall acknowledged smoothly. We're not here to make claims without due process. However, given the potential historical importance, she gestured to the building's obvious state of disrepair. We'd like to propose a cooperative approach to examining and preserving these artifacts properly. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by Olivia's practical intervention. Perhaps we should all move to the front corner. There are still some functional chairs there, and it's the only area without active leaks. This sensible suggestion was accepted, and the group relocated to a slightly less damaged section of the barn. Despite water stains on the walls, the area retained traces of its former character, with vintage farm tools still visible on the walls. Once settled, Professor Harlow continued with evident academic enthusiasm. The McBride treasure has been something of a holy grail for Western historians for generations. References in newspaper accounts and sheriff's reports confirm its existence, but its location remains one of the great historical mysteries of the frontier era. Morgan considered her position carefully before responding. We found the underground chamber less than an hour ago. We haven't had time to properly examine the contents. Probably wise, Dr. Marshall noted. Old artifacts can be extremely fragile. We have conservation specialists who can examine them without causing damage. Lucas cleared his throat. With all due respect, what exactly are you proposing? Morgan owns this property and has invested everything she has in saving it from developers who would demolish it without a second thought for its historical significance. This direct question seemed to prompt a shift in Dr. Marshall's approach. She exchanged glances with Professor Harlow before addressing Morgan directly. Miss Foster, the State Historical Preservation Office would like to propose an arrangement. We need to document and preserve these materials, but we recognize your legal ownership of the property and the unique circumstances of this discovery. Professor Harlow continued, what Dr. Marshall is suggesting is a cooperative approach. We would provide immediate assistance with your building's structural issues, engineering support, preservation specialists, renovation grants, resources to stabilize both the barn and the artifacts. In exchange, Morgan asked, skeptical but interested. In exchange for your cooperation in allowing our experts to properly examine and authenticate the artifacts, Dr. Marshall explained. No removal without proper documentation and agreement. Your rights as property owner would be respected throughout the process. The offer was tempting, particularly given Morgan's limited resources for addressing the extensive renovation needs. Still, she sensed there was more to their urgency than simple historical interest. Why the rush? She asked directly. These artifacts have been hidden for almost 150 years. Professor Harlow's expression became more serious. 2 reasons, Miss Foster. First, proper conservation is time-sensitive once artifacts are disturbed from stable conditions. Second, rumors have already begun circulating about a significant frontier-era discovery in Pinecrest. From outside came the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Through the barn windows, Morgan could see official historical society vans and equipment, resources far beyond what she could afford or access independently. They're mobilizing significant resources, Olivia observed quietly to Morgan. Whatever is in those chests, they consider it extremely important. Morgan weighed her options carefully. The barn required extensive work, far exceeding her limited budget, The structural issues were worse than she had initially estimated. Yet, this discovery potentially represented leverage, a way to ensure McBride Barnes' preservation rather than just her temporary financial survival. "I'll cooperate under certain conditions," she finally stated, meeting Dr. Marshall's gaze directly. "Your team helps secure the building from further deterioration. Nothing leaves the premises without my knowledge and consent. And most importantly, whatever historical significance is confirmed becomes part of McBride Barnes' official record and preservation status." Professor Harlow leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "You're thinking of pursuing historical landmark designation?" Morgan nodded. "This building represents my entire financial investment and the future security for my daughter. If these artifacts are as significant as you believe, they should help secure McBride Barnes' future as a protected historical site rather than just another strip mall." Dr. Marshall considered this for a moment before extending her hand. "Those terms are reasonable. We'll need to formalize the arrangement, but given the historical significance, we can proceed with verbal agreement while our legal team prepares proper documentation." As they shook hands, Morgan felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. What had begun as a desperate last-chance investment had suddenly become entangled with Outlaw, secrets, and national historical interests. The direction of her future had shifted dramatically in the space of an hour, from simply fighting against structural decay to potentially presiding over a nationally significant historical discovery. Outside, preservation specialists were already unloading equipment, preparing to secure both the barn and its unexpected historical treasure from further deterioration. Within the hour, McBride Barn transformed from an abandoned, crumbling structure into the center of a coordinated historical preservation operation, all because of what might lie within those century-old wooden chests hidden beneath the storeroom floor. The true nature of her discovery and how it would reshape her future remained bound within treasures that had been patiently waiting for over 100 years, ready to reveal secrets that could rewrite history and just possibly save Morgan and her daughter from financial ruin. The termite-damaged floorboards in the storeroom had been carefully removed, revealing the entrance to the hidden tunnel beneath what had once been McBride's pioneer barn. Morgan Foster stood at the edge of the excavation, watching as preservation specialists in white cotton gloves meticulously photographed each gold coin before placing them in secure, padded containers. The largest wooden chest lay open on a specially designed conservation table, its aged pine revealing the carefully carved insignia of Jesse McBride, a distinctive crossed revolver and horseshoe that matched known samples of the Outlaw's personal markings. "These aren't just any frontier artifacts," Professor Harlow said, his voice hushed with academic reverence as he studied the contents through specialized magnifying equipment. "These are the proceeds from the Central Pacific heist of 1882, the robbery that historians have debated for generations." Morgan observed the professor's careful examination, still processing the surreal turn of events that had transformed her desperate financial gamble into the center of historical excitement. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been a single mother facing imminent homelessness. Now she stood surrounded by preservation experts, historians, and museum conservators, all focused intently on treasure found beneath her failing barn's floor. "The authenticity is undeniable," Dr. Marshall confirmed, comparing the coin dates and markings to authenticated period currency displayed on her tablet. "The minting details, wear patterns, and distribution of dates all match known currency from the period. What we're seeing here is physical evidence of one of the most notorious unsolved robberies in Western history." Outside, the transformation of McBride Barn continued at remarkable speed. The Historical Preservation Office had mobilized emergency stabilization teams to address the building's most critical structural issues. Temporary supports braced weakened ceiling joists, while conservation architects meticulously documented every original feature of the pre-statehood structure. Through the windows, Morgan could see curious onlookers gathering across the road, their numbers growing as word spread throughout Pinecrest about the historic discovery. Local news vans had already arrived, reporters setting up cameras aimed at the barn's weathered facade. "The coins alone are extraordinary," Professor Harlow continued, carefully turning a gold double eagle with conservation tools. "Look at these San Francisco mint marks from the 1870s. Several of these dates are extremely rare in any condition." Dr. Marshall nodded, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal genuine historical excitement. "And the silver bars with the Wells Fargo stamps. These match the manifest from the Central Pacific Express car that was robbed. This completely confirms Jesse McBride's involvement in the heist." As the experts continued their examination, Olivia approached Morgan, stepping carefully around the equipment that now filled the barn's front room. "Channel 7 wants an interview," she said quietly, "and the mayor called. He's thrilled about this tremendous opportunity for Pinecrest and wants to stop by this afternoon." Morgan smiled wryly. "Funny, 24 hours ago, he wouldn't return my calls about zoning questions. Amazing how finding 140-year-old outlaw treasure changes your popularity." "Welcome to small-town politics," Olivia observed with characteristic bluntness. Lucas Reeves entered from the back of the building, conferring with the structural engineers who had been assessing the barn's foundation. Unlike the academic excitement of the historians, his focus remained practical, the physical stability of the building that housed the remarkable discovery. "North wall needs immediate reinforcement," he reported to Morgan. "They've identified active water infiltration that's compromising the original stonework. The good news is the main support. Beams are solid oak. They don't build with materials like that anymore." The preservation team had set up temporary lighting throughout the barn, illuminating decades of neglect, but also revealing glimpses of the building's original character. Hand-forged hardware partially hidden beneath layers of rust. The faded, but still visible, McBride and Sons lettering on the wall behind the main doors. A young historian approached Morgan hesitantly, holding a tablet with digital images of documents found in the smallest chest. "Ms. Foster, we've begun transcribing Jesse McBride's personal letters. There's something you should see." The historian navigated to a specific page where McBride's rough handwriting described his decision to entrust his stolen fortune to his cousin's care. Ezekiel proves himself the most trustworthy of kin. With lawmen scouring every inch of frontier territory and rumors of Pinkerton detectives in town, I have entrusted my share of the Central Pacific Haul to his safekeeping. He has devised an ingenious hiding place beneath his establishment, known only to the two of us. Should misfortune befall me, Ezekiel will ensure my daughter receives her rightful inheritance." Morgan read the passage with growing wonder, realizing she was seeing a first-hand account of the very hiding place they had discovered. The connection across time felt almost tangible, McBride's words describing the secret compartment in which they had been hidden, finally discovered generations later. "There's more," the historian said, scrolling to another entry dated 2 weeks later. "This appears to be McBride's last letter before he was killed in Colorado." The letter entry described McBride's final arrangements and revealed the significance of the artifacts Morgan had found. "Tomorrow, I ride for the Colorado Territory where Jackson claims to have secured safe passage. Should events turn against me, I leave these papers with Ezekiel as insurance, containing, as they do, not only my will but details of our operation that must never fall into the hands of law enforcement. My wound from the Grantsville escape troubles me still, but duty to my companions drives me forward." McBride was killed in a shootout near Denver 2 weeks after writing this, Professor Harlow explained, joining them. He never returned to retrieve his treasure, and Ezekiel died of tuberculosis 3 years later. The secret of their hiding place died with them until today. As the historical significance of her discovery continued to unfold, Morgan felt. A growing sense of responsibility. These weren't just artifacts that might save her from financial ruin. They represented a lost piece of American history that had been entrusted to her through extraordinary circumstances. The bell above the barn door jangled as a distinguished woman in her 50s entered, accompanied by an aide carrying a portfolio. Despite the chaos of equipment and preservation activities, she moved with confident purpose, directly approaching Dr. Marshall. "Eleanor, the news reached the Capitol this morning," she said without preamble. "The governor sends his personal interest in this discovery." Dr. Marshall straightened visibly. "Director Blackwell, this is unexpected. We've only just begun the authentication process." When Jesse McBride's missing fortune surfaces after nearly a century and a half, it becomes a priority, Director Blackwell replied before turning her attention to Morgan. "Miss Foster, I'm Victoria Blackwell, Director of the State Museum of History. I understand we have you to thank for preserving a significant piece of American frontier history." "I just bought a failing barn," Morgan replied, somewhat dazed by this latest development. Finding outlaw treasure wasn't exactly in my renovation budget. A hint of genuine amusement crossed the director's face. "Nonetheless, your discovery has immense historical significance. Jesse McBride's notorious gang, established criminal networks that shaped the development of law enforcement across the Western Territories." She gestured toward the artifacts being carefully examined. "These materials fill crucial gaps in our understanding of frontier-era crime and the economic impact of major robberies on developing communities. The State Museum, in conjunction with the Historical Preservation Office, would like to discuss a formal arrangement that benefits both historical preservation and your personal situation." Morgan felt a sudden weariness. Throughout this extraordinary day, she had maintained some control over her discovery. The director's arrival suggested the stakes and the government's interest were even higher than she had realized. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked cautiously. Director Blackwell nodded to her aide, who opened the portfolio embossed with the State Museum seal. "A proposal that acknowledges both the historical significance of these artifacts and your ownership. Rights to the property where they were discovered." She removed several documents and continued, "The State Museum, in partnership with the Historical Preservation Trust, would like to designate McBride Barn as a state historical landmark with specific focus on its significance to frontier history." Morgan processed this information, understanding its potential impact on her precarious financial situation. Historical landmark designation would protect the barn from development, potentially securing both its future and her investment. The designation would come with substantial restoration grants, Director Blackwell continued, sufficient to return McBride Barn to its original condition. Additionally, we propose establishing the McBride Center for Frontier History here on the premises, a research facility and museum open to scholars and the public. The scope of the proposal was breathtaking. What had begun as Morgan's desperate last stand against financial ruin was transforming into something far beyond her initial hopes of simply restoring the barn for a modest business. "And my role in this?" Morgan asked, sensing there must be more to the arrangement. "We would like to offer you the position of site director," the director stated. "Your background in educational program management before your divorce makes you uniquely qualified. The position includes residence rights to the renovated caretaker's cottage and a substantial annual salary funded through the Historical Trust." Morgan felt momentarily dizzy as the pieces fell into place. Her previous career, abandoned during the bitter divorce and subsequent financial collapse, had been in museum education. Director Blackwell's staff had clearly conducted thorough background research. "This is overwhelming," Morgan admitted, looking around at the deteriorating barn that was apparently being offered as the centerpiece of a new historical institution with herself at its helm. "Take time to consider," Director Blackwell advised. "The formal proposal includes all details regarding funding, restoration timelines, and your contractual position. For now, we need your permission to transfer the artifacts to proper conservation facilities while maintaining clear records of their provenance and your discovery rights. As afternoon faded into evening, Morgan found herself signing temporary custody agreements for the artifacts while being assured of her central role in their future presentation and interpretation. The day's extraordinary events, from desperate property assessment to outlaw treasure discovery to a personal offer from the State Museum director, had transformed her circumstances so completely that she struggled to process the implications. Standing in the barn's small side yard as twilight settled over Pinecrest, Morgan was joined by Olivia, who had worked tirelessly throughout the day, helping coordinate the sudden influx of officials and experts. "So," Olivia said simply, "Director of a state historical center. Quite a promotion from broke single mom with a crumbling barn in less than 24 hours. Morgan gazed at the barn's weathered timber exterior, seeing it now not as a desperate last investment, but as the setting for an institution of historical significance, with herself no longer fighting for survival, but leading a prestigious historical center. "Life changes in an instant," she replied quietly. "Yesterday, I was facing homelessness. Today, I'm being offered the chance to preserve history and rebuild my life simultaneously." As preservation personnel continued their work inside the barn, Morgan allowed herself a moment to absorb the transformation of her circumstances, a transformation as dramatic and unexpected as the frontier secrets that had lain hidden beneath her feet, waiting for precisely the right moment to emerge from darkness into light. "The question is," Olivia said, "ever practical. What happens next? They're offering you everything you need, financial stability, housing, purpose, but it's also binding your future to this place completely." Morgan considered this perspective, watching as additional preservation specialists arrived with specialized equipment for documenting the barn's original architectural features. "Sometimes the path forward appears in the most unexpected places," she said. "My grandfather always said, opportunity doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips in through the back door when you're busy looking elsewhere." The mention of her grandfather brought a moment of reflection. The lessons he had taught her about resilience and adapting to changing circumstances had driven her to this desperate purchase, which had now opened an entirely new future she could never have anticipated. "He would have loved this," Morgan said softly. The history, the discovery, the second chance emerging from seeming disaster. Inside the barn, the preservation team had set up powerful spotlights to continue their work into the evening. The illumination transformed the building's facade, highlighting architectural details long obscured by neglect. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk across the road, watching the unprecedented activity with curious excitement. Lucas approached, carrying architectural plans now marked with preservation notations. "The structural team has completed their initial assessment," he reported. "The foundation is better than we feared. These buildings were built to last. With proper restoration, McBride Barn could stand another century easily." Morgan noticed something different in Lucas's demeanor, a professional excitement that matched her own growing sense of possibility. "You're enjoying this," she observed. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Watching history come alive. Seeing craftsmanship from 140 years ago finally getting the recognition it deserves. This is why I went into historical restoration in the first place." Their conversation was interrupted as Professor Harlow hurried outside, clutching his tablet with evident excitement. "Miss Foster, we found something extraordinary in McBride's personal papers, something that changes everything about how we understand the Central Pacific robbery." He showed her the screen where a high-resolution image displayed a page from McBride's journal. The entry described not just the robbery itself, but a secret arrangement with a corrupt railroad official who had provided critical information about the gold shipment. This reveals that McBride's famous heist wasn't just brilliant planning. It was an inside job facilitated by the railroad's own security chief, the professor explained. This completely revises our understanding of why the robbery succeeded and why the investigation failed to recover the stolen goods. The historical implications were clearly significant, but Morgan was struck by the human element of the story, the complex web of corruption and betrayal that had characterized the frontier era, their contribution erased from official histories until this moment. History is always more complicated than the simplified versions we learn, she observed. More human, with all the messy courage and contradiction that implies. Professor Harlow nodded appreciatively. Precisely why these artifacts are so valuable. They give us the unfiltered reality, not the sanitized account that made it into official records. As night fell completely, temporary lighting illuminated the barn like a stage set. News crews had set up across the street, broadcasting live updates about the historic discovery. Local residents continued to gather, their numbers growing as word spread throughout the small town. Mayor Thompson's car pulled up, the town's political leader emerging with an entourage of council members, all eager to associate themselves with what was quickly becoming Pinecrest's most significant historical event in generations. "Miss Foster," the mayor called, approaching with hand extended and camera-ready smile in place. "What a tremendous day for our community. The historical significance of your discovery cannot be overstated." Morgan accepted his handshake with gracious restraint, recalling how the same official had dismissed her zoning questions just days earlier. "It's been quite unexpected," she replied simply. "The town council is prepared to fast-track any permissions needed for the restoration." He continued enthusiastically. "Pinecrest stands ready to support this historical treasure in every way possible." As the mayor launched into what sounded like a practice speech about historical preservation and community heritage, Morgan caught Olivia's knowing glance. They both recognized the political opportunism at work, but also understood that such support would prove valuable for the barn's future. Director Blackwell emerged from the barn, joining their conversation with purposeful authority that subtly redirected the mayor's attention. "Mayor Thompson, the State Museum appreciates Pinecrest's enthusiasm. We'll need coordinated support as we develop the McBride Center. Perhaps your office could help facilitate community engagement sessions in the coming weeks." The director's diplomatic redirection impressed Morgan, acknowledging the mayor's importance while channeling his energy toward constructive purposes rather than mere publicity. As the officials discussed logistics, Morgan stepped away, needing a moment of quiet to process the day's extraordinary developments. She found herself near the barn's back entrance, a small overgrown area where moonlight illuminated remnants of what had once been a corral. Lucas found her there, respectfully maintaining distance while offering silent companionship as she contemplated the whirlwind transformation of her circumstances. "When I bid on this place," Morgan said eventually, "I thought I was crazy, spending my last dollars on a building that might be beyond saving. Everyone told me to walk away. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the most unexpected rewards," Lucas observed. "Though I doubt anyone could have predicted outlaw treasure beneath the storeroom floor," Morgan smiled. "Life has a strange way of revealing pathways just when all doors seem closed." The quiet moment was interrupted by Olivia, who appeared with 3 cups of coffee from the shop down the road. "Fair warning," she said, handing them each a cup. "Reporter from the National Geographic wants an interview. The preservation team needs decisions about original features versus modern necessities. And Director Blackwell is talking about a formal announcement ceremony tomorrow." Morgan took a deep breath, accepting both the coffee and the responsibilities that had arrived so unexpectedly. "From bankruptcy to historical landmark director in 24 hours, she said with a hint of wonder. "I'm not sure I fully processed that. This is really happening." "It's happening," Olivia confirmed. "And while it's an amazing opportunity, it's also going to be a marathon, not a sprint." They're talking about a year-long restoration process, developing educational programs, cataloging artifacts. Building something meaningful takes time, Lucas added. Just like the original construction of this place in the 1880s, Ezekiel McBride didn't know his barn would someday house secret outlaw treasure or become a historical center, but he built it to last anyway. This perspective resonated with Morgan. The building that had seemed like her last desperate gamble was revealing itself as something far more significant, a container for history that had patiently waited for the right moment to reveal its secrets. As they returned to the front of the barn, the scene had transformed yet again. Powerful lights had been set up for a formal press conference with Dr. Marshall and Professor Harlow preparing to address the growing crowd of journalists and community members. Director Blackwell approached Morgan. "We'd like you to join the announcement. After all, this discovery wouldn't have happened without your decision to purchase and investigate this building." Morgan hesitated, still adjusting to her sudden transformation from anonymous single mother to central figure in a major historical discovery. "What should I say?" she asked, genuinely uncertain of her role in the unfolding narrative. "Just share your authentic experience," the director advised. "How it felt to discover these artifacts, what this building means to you, your vision for its future as part of our shared historical legacy." As Morgan took her place beside the historical experts, cameras focused on the unlikely group standing before the weathered facade of McBride Barn. The building that had seemed like a foolish last stand against financial ruin now stood illuminated, literally and figuratively, its historical significance finally recognized after generations of obscurity. Professor Harlow spoke first, explaining the historical significance of McBride's treasure with academic precision. Dr. Marshall followed, outlining the authentication process and preliminary findings about the artifact's contents. Finally, Director Blackwell announced the preliminary agreement to establish the McBride Center for Frontier History. Then, with surprising nervousness, Morgan stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. Looking out at the faces of community members, journalists, officials, and historians, she found her voice. "Yesterday, I was a broke single mother with nothing but this crumbling barn between me and homelessness," she began with unflinching honesty. "Today I stand before you as the guardian of a historical treasure that changes our understanding of a pivotal moment in American frontier history." She gestured to the barn behind her. McBride's wasn't just a barn. It was a witness to history, a keeper of secrets, and now a gateway to understanding our past more completely. What seemed like the end of my story has become a new beginning. Not just for me and my daughter, but for this building and the history it protected for over 140 years. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Morgan felt a profound shift in her understanding of value and opportunity. The true worth of her desperate purchase had nothing to do with real estate or business potential. It lay in the historical connections that had been patiently waiting to be discovered, in the stories that would now be preserved rather than lost to time. The failing barn that had represented her last financial hope had revealed itself to be something far more valuable, a physical connection to a pivotal moment in history, a bridge between past and future, and the foundation for a second chance. She could never have imagined. 3 months after the discovery of Jesse McBride's hidden treasure, McBride Barn stood transformed. The summer heat had given way to crisp autumn breezes that rustled through the newly restored garden where interpretive signs now guided visitors through the history of frontier ranching and outlaw hideouts. Scaffolding embraced the building's timber exterior where master craftspeople meticulously replaced damaged boards using historically accurate techniques. The once rotting wooden sign had been painstakingly restored, its hand-carved lettering gleaming in the October sunlight. Morgan Foster stood in what had once been the water-damaged storeroom, now carefully reconstructed to showcase both its 1880s appearance and the famous hiding place beneath the floor. Before her, architectural plans were spread across a massive table where a team of preservation specialists, historians, and museum designers engaged in animated discussion about the final exhibition layout for the McBride Center for Frontier History. "The tunnel exhibit needs more space," argued Dr. Sophia Chun, the museum development specialist who had joined the project from the Smithsonian. "Modern visitors expect to experience the discovery moment, not just see artifacts behind glass." "But we can't compromise the original storeroom configuration," countered Lucas, now officially the restoration director for the entire project. "Those timber supports are mentioned specifically in McBride's correspondence with his cousin about concealing his whereabouts." Morgan listened to the debate with a small smile, still adjusting to her role as mediator between historical authenticity and visitor engagement. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of activity as Director Blackwell's proposal transformed from concept to reality with remarkable speed. Congressional interest in the discovery had accelerated funding approvals, while academic excitement about the artifact's contents had attracted world-class talent to the project. "We can preserve the storeroom's integrity while still accommodating the experiential displays," Morgan suggested, indicating an alternative space on the blueprints. "The former tack room has the necessary square footage and fewer original features to consider." Both specialists nodded in agreement, another small victory in the delicate balancing act Morgan navigated daily. Her previous museum education experience had proven unexpectedly valuable, though nothing in her career had prepared her for managing a project of this magnitude and historical significance. Olivia entered the storeroom, tablet in hand. Her role had evolved from supportive friend to official communications director for the center, a position that had been Morgan's first executive decision. Recognizing that Olivia's practical efficiency and media background made her perfect for managing the growing public interest in McBride Barn. "The governor's office just confirmed," Olivia announced. "He'll attend the official opening ceremony next month. They're sending an advance team next week to begin security preparations." This news sent a ripple of excitement through the room. Gubernatorial attendance would guarantee statewide media coverage and elevate the center's profile significantly. "That's 2 weeks earlier than we expected," Morgan noted, mentally recalculating timelines. "Can we be ready?" Lucas consulted his detailed project management software. "The exterior restoration will be complete. The main exhibition spaces in the East Wing are on schedule. The tunnel recreation is ahead of schedule. Actually, it's the West Wing interior that concerns me. Those rooms won't be fully restored." "We can adjust the opening tour route," Morgan decided. "Focus on the completed areas and the treasure exhibition. The conservation lab can remain behind the scenes for now." As the team dispersed to continue their various tasks, Morgan took a moment to walk through the barn alone, something she tried to do daily despite her packed schedule. These quiet moments helped her maintain perspective on the extraordinary journey from desperation to purpose that had defined her past months. She made her way to the front room, now fully restored with period-appropriate furnishings and climate control systems, hidden discreetly within the historical architecture. The space had become her favorite retreat, not just for its beauty, but for its connection to the discovery that had changed everything. Professor Harlow looked up from a desk where he was examining digital scans of McBride's correspondence. As the university's lead historian on the project, he divided his time between campus and McBride Barn, coordinating the academic analysis of the artifact's contents. "Morgan, perfect timing. We've just decoded another of McBride's cipher passages," he announced, his academic excitement evident. The Central Pacific heist was even more strategically complex than historians realized. McBride was simultaneously coordinating with 3 separate gangs while publicly maintaining that he worked alone. Morgan joined him at the desk, genuinely interested in these historical revelations that continued to emerge from the artifacts. What had begun as simply a financial opportunity had evolved into intellectual fascination with the historical narrative. unfolding from her discovery. "Have you found any more references to Ezekiel's role?" she asked, having developed particular interest in the original barn owner's position as confidant and keeper of outlaw secrets. "Indeed," Professor Harlow replied, indicating a passage on his screen. "This letter essentially confirms that Ezekiel constructed the tunnel and chamber, specifically at Jesse's request after a close encounter with Pinkerton detectives in 1882. Jesse no longer trusted traditional hideouts for his most valuable possessions. This information added another layer to Morgan's connection with the property. Ezekiel McBride had faced his own impossible choice between law-abiding citizenry and his personal commitment to family loyalty. His decision, made over a century ago, had created the opportunity now reshaping her life. Professor Harlow called a young researcher from across the room. "We found something unusual in the journal entries from Wyoming. Can you bring the high-resolution scan?" As the historian excused himself to investigate, Morgan continued her walk through the barn, climbing the newly restored staircase to the hayloft. Here, renovation crews worked on converting former storage areas into research spaces and administrative offices. The caretaker's cottage had been designated as Morgan's private residence, part of her compensation package as center director, though renovations there had been prioritized below the public spaces. The cottage, still in the early stages of restoration, offered a commanding view of Pinecrest's historic district. From this vantage point, Morgan could see the positive ripple effect their project was having on the surrounding area. Inspired by the barn's transformation, neighboring businesses had begun their own restoration efforts. The hardware store across the street sported fresh paint in historically accurate colors, while the former mercantile 2 doors down had removed the modern aluminum storefront to reveal original woodwork beneath. Her phone chimed with a message from Lucas. "Found something interesting in the foundation. Can you come down?" Intrigued, Morgan made her way back downstairs and through the front room, now arranged to showcase ranching operations during the frontier era. The foundation, once a damp, crumbling structure, had been completely transformed. Modern support systems had been installed, structural reinforcements added, and the space reorganized to accommodate mechanical equipment while preserving historical elements. She found Lucas near a section of original foundation wall, carefully examining the stonework with a specialized light. "What did you find?" Morgan asked as she approached. Lucas indicated a section of stone where removal of later additions had revealed original masonry. The restoration team removed the modern concrete overlay and found this. Embedded in the original foundation stones was a small metal plate, tarnished with age but clearly intentional. Engraved on its surface was a message: "Fortune favors the bold, but loyalty outlasts gold. Preserve well what matters most." At 1883. "It's like they knew," Morgan said softly, kneeling to examine the plate more closely. "They created this hiding place, expecting the treasure would eventually be found, just not in their lifetime. A message across time. They preserved these artifacts for future generations," Lucas agreed, trusting someone would eventually understand their importance. The discovery of this small acknowledgement, this intentional message from the past, affected Morgan deeply. It reinforced the sense of purpose that had been growing within her since accepting leadership of the center. She wasn't just salvaging her own future. She was fulfilling the intentions of those who had created this historical repository over a century ago. "We should incorporate this into the exhibition," she decided. "It captures the essence of what we're trying to communicate about the McBride cousins' foresight." As they discussed possibilities, Morgan's phone rang. The screen displayed Director Blackwell, a call she couldn't ignore. "Miss Foster," the director's voice came through clearly. "I've just received confirmation that the Smithsonian is interested in featuring the McBride discovery in their upcoming Legends of the West exhibition. They're proposing a partnership that would significantly enhance our center's national profile." The news was yet another validation of the historical significance of what they had uncovered. What had begun as Morgan's desperate attempt to secure shelter for herself and her daughter had expanded into a project of national historical importance. "That's wonderful news," Morgan replied, already thinking of the logistical implications. "Would this involve temporarily loaning some of the artifacts?" "Yes, but with significant benefits to our center," Director Blackwell explained. "They're offering to provide specialized conservation services for our entire collection and would feature McBride Barn prominently in all promotional materials. This could dramatically increase our visibility and future funding opportunities." As Morgan discussed the details with the director, she couldn't help but reflect on the strange path that had led her here. Her financial desperation had led to an impulsive decision. That decision had placed her in precisely the right location to discover hidden historical treasures. That discovery had attracted resources and opportunities beyond anything she could have imagined. After ending the call, Morgan rejoined Lucas at the foundation wall. "The Smithsonian wants to feature our discovery," she told him, still processing this latest development. "From desperate auction purchase to Smithsonian exhibition in 3 months, Lucas observed with a smile. "You certainly know how to make an entrance into the historical preservation world." Morgan laughed, the sound echoing pleasantly in the restored space. "Pure luck and desperation. Not exactly a career strategy I'd recommend." "I wouldn't call it just luck," Lucas replied thoughtfully. "You saw potential in this building when everyone else saw only decay. You took a risk when playing it safe would have been easier. That's not luck, that's courage." The observation touched Morgan unexpectedly. Throughout the whirlwind of the past months, she had attributed much of what happened to fortunate timing and desperate circumstances. She hadn't considered that her own determination might have been the essential catalyst that set everything in motion. "I had no choice," she said quietly. "Emma needed a home, and this was all I could afford." "There are always choices," Lucas countered gently. "Easier ones than buying a condemned barn with your last dollars. You chose the harder path because you saw possibilities others missed." Before Morgan could respond, Olivia appeared at the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but Emma's school just called. The principal wants to know if she can interview your daughter for the school newspaper about what it's like to live in a real outlaw hideout. Apparently, Emma's become something of a celebrity in the 6th grade." Morgan smiled, thinking of her daughter's excitement when they'd moved into temporary housing on the property last month. After 2 years of increasing financial insecurity, Emma had embraced their new situation with typical 11-year-old adaptability, proudly giving her friends unofficial tours of the construction areas despite Morgan's attempts to keep her away from active work zones. "Tell the principal it's fine as long as it doesn't interfere with her schoolwork," Morgan decided. "And remind Emma that the conservation areas are still off-limits for her impromptu tour groups." The next morning brought a frenzy of activity as news of the governor's expanded plans filtered through the project teams. Additional security preparations were implemented, exhibition timelines accelerated, and media strategies revised to accommodate the heightened profile of the opening ceremony. Morgan found herself in back-to-back meetings with government officials, academic partners, and institutional representatives, all eager to align with what was quickly becoming a prestigious state initiative. Through it all, she maintained clear focus on the center's core mission, preserving and interpreting the historical significance of the McBride artifacts while honoring the foresight of those who had secured them for future generations. During a rare quiet moment in the afternoon, Morgan returned to the front room where Professor Harlow was supervising the FIs in the installation of climate-controlled display cases for the most fragile artifacts. "These cases are remarkable," she observed, examining the nearly invisible technology maintaining precise environmental conditions within elegant, historically appropriate cabinetry. "State of the art," Professor Harlow agreed. the same systems used for the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Another benefit of the governor's interest in our little project. Morgan smiled at the characterization. What had begun as discovering a hidden tunnel in a failing barn had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, drawing increasing resources and attention as its significance became clear. "I've been thinking about Ezekiel McBride," she said, glancing around the barn that had once been his livelihood. What courage it must have taken to establish this secret vault. He risked his reputation and safety to preserve his cousin's legacy. Professor Harlow nodded thoughtfully. The frontier dilemma, balancing family loyalty against legal obligations, immediate security against long-term interests. The McBride cousins chose a middle path, not destruction, not exposure, but preservation for a future they believed would come. And it did, Morgan observed, just not in their lifetime. That's the essence of genuine historical stewardship, the historian replied. Taking actions whose value may not be recognized in your own time, trusting that future generations will understand what you protected and why. This perspective resonated deeply with Morgan. Her own actions, purchasing a ruined barn with her last resources, had seemed foolish to others at the time. Yet that decision, born of desperation rather than historical foresight, had created the conditions for an important discovery and preservation effort. As she continued her rounds of the property, Morgan encountered teams of workers throughout the building and grounds, all focused on preparing for the rapidly approaching opening. Ceremony. Carpenters restored ornate woodwork according to historical photographs. Electricians installed subtle lighting to highlight architectural features. Conservators prepared climate-controlled exhibition spaces for the artifacts themselves. In the former main area, now transformed into the primary exhibition hall, Olivia was directing the installation of interpretive panels that would guide visitors through the story of the McBride cousins, the Central Pacific heist, and the century-long journey of the hidden treasure. "We've adjusted the narrative to incorporate the governor's new initiative," Olivia explained, showing Morgan the updated introduction panel. The exhibition now frames the McBride artifacts as the foundation of an ongoing state effort to preserve frontier history rather than simply a remarkable discovery. Morgan reviewed the text, impressed by how Olivia had elevated the significance without losing the personal elements of the story, including the dramatic discovery that had captivated initial media interest. "You've maintained the human element while expanding the historical context," she observed. "Visitors will connect with both the frontier figures and the modern discovery narrative. That's the balance we need. People remember stories about people, not just abstract historical concepts," Olivia agreed. "The drama of a struggling single mom finding outlaw treasure in her barn floor creates an entry point for visitors to engage with the broader historical significance." As Morgan continued through the exhibition space, she found herself reflected. In the narrative being constructed, her desperate purchase transformed into a pivotal moment of historical preservation. The story being told wasn't just about Jesse and Ezekiel McBride, but about the continuous thread of preservation and discovery that had ultimately led to this moment of recognition. In that realization, Morgan found a deeper significance to her journey. What had begun as merely personal survival had evolved into something that would outlast her, a contribution to historical understanding that would inform and inspire long after her own story was forgotten. The failing barn she had purchased out of desperation had become not just her salvation, but her legacy. Later that afternoon, Morgan met with the educational programming team that would develop curriculum materials for school groups visiting the center. The team included local teachers, university education specialists, and museum professionals, all focused on making the McBride discovery accessible to students of various ages. "We want to move beyond simply presenting facts about frontier outlaws," explained Dr. Maya Williams, the education director recruited from a prestigious museum in Washington. Students should understand how individual decisions like Ezekiel, hiding these artifacts can impact historical understanding generations later. Morgan appreciated this approach. It's about connecting past choices to present discovery, helping students see history not as inevitable but as shaped by human decisions in moments of crisis. The conversation shifted to practical considerations, age-appropriate activities, interactive elements, connections to state curriculum standards. Throughout the discussion, Morgan found herself drawing on her previous educational experience while also incorporating the personal insights gained through her extraordinary journey from financial crisis to historical preservation. We should include elements about preservation itself, she suggested. How historical understanding depends on the physical survival of artifacts. Many students have never considered how fragile our connections to the past actually are. As the meeting concluded, Lucas arrived with updated restoration timelines. While most of the project remained on schedule, supply chain issues were threatening to delay completion of certain historical reproductions needed for the barn display. The hand-forged hardware is the main concern, he explained. There are only 3 blacksmiths in the country who can create historically accurate reproductions of 1880s hinges and latches. Morgan considered the options. What if we approach this as an educational opportunity? Invite one of the blacksmiths to do a public demonstration during the opening. Visitors could watch the traditional techniques while we complete the installation. Lucas nodded appreciatively. Turning a potential problem into a feature. That's why you're running this place. Necessity is the mother of improvisation, Morgan replied with a smile. Something I've become quite familiar with lately. As evening approached, Morgan took a final walk through the barn. Construction teams had departed for the day, leaving behind the tangible progress of their efforts: freshly restored timbers, repaired stonework, carefully reconstructed historical elements. The transformation from crumbling ruin to emerging historical center was increasingly visible. In the quiet of the building, Morgan could almost sense the layered history surrounding her. Ezekiel McBride constructing his frontier barn, Jesse entrusting his ill-gotten fortune to his cousin's care, the artifacts waiting patiently through decades of obscurity until chance and desperation revealed them once more. Director Blackwell arrived for their scheduled meeting, carrying a portfolio containing the latest project updates. Her initial skepticism about Morgan's qualifications had evolved into genuine respect as she witnessed Morgan's dedication and growing expertise. The Budget Committee approved the expanded educational wing, the director announced as they settled into the temporary office space. Construction can begin next month, assuming the Historical Commission approvals come through. On schedule. From trying to save a failing barn to planning a state-funded educational facility, Morgan marveled. Quite a journey in just 3 months. The director studied her thoughtfully. You know, when we first met, I wondered if you were up to this challenge. Taking someone from financial crisis to directing a historical center seemed risky, regardless of your background. Morgan appreciated the candor. I wondered the same thing myself. There were moments when I thought I'd made another terrible decision accepting this position. Yet here we are, Director Blackwell observed. The McBride Center is ahead of schedule, under budget, and already generating national academic interest. Sometimes the most unlikely candidates prove the most successful. Their conversation turned to preparations for the opening ceremony, scheduled to coincide with the annual Pinecrest Frontier Days celebration. The governor's participation had elevated what would have been a local event into a state occasion with attendant, protocol requirements, and security considerations. The governor wants to emphasize the economic revitalization aspect, Director Blackwell explained. How historical preservation can drive community renewal. Pinecrest is becoming something of a model for small-town revitalization through cultural heritage. Morgan nodded, having witnessed this effect firsthand. Since work began on McBride Barn, 3 neighboring businesses had undertaken their own restoration projects. Tourism inquiries had increased dramatically. Property values throughout the historic district had stabilized after years of decline. "It's remarkable how preserving the past can secure the future," she observed, "not just for the buildings themselves, but for entire communities." After the director departed, Morgan walked to the newly renovated caretaker's cottage where she and Emma had been living for the past month. While most of the center's public spaces were nearing completion, their personal living quarters remained a work in progress, much like her own journey from financial disaster to unexpected purpose. The cottage's front windows overlooked Pinecrest's main street, where evening visitors now strolled past illuminated shop windows and historically accurate street lamps. When Morgan had first purchased the barn, this same street had featured vacant storefronts and little pedestrian activity. Now energy and purpose had returned to the historic district. Emma was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around her as she worked on a history project, a diorama of frontier life that had taken on new meaning since their unexpected career change. "Mom," she called excitedly. "Miss Patterson said I can bring my whole class for a special tour before the official opening. Can I show them the tunnel recreation?" Morgan smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. After the initial shock of their financial collapse and the uncertainty that followed, Emma had embraced their new situation with remarkable resilience. What had begun as a desperate move to secure basic shelter had transformed into an adventure that sparked her interest in history and gave her unique status among her peers. "We'll coordinate with your teacher," Morgan promised. "The construction in that section should be finished by next week." As she helped Emma with her project, Morgan reflected on how their lives had changed. The constant anxiety about money that had shadowed them for 2 years had lifted. The temporary apartment they'd been forced to leave had been replaced by a historic cottage with genuine character. Most importantly, the helplessness she had felt facing eviction with a child depending on her had been replaced by purposeful work that combined her educational background with unexpected historical significance. "Do you like living here better than our old apartment?" Morgan asked, curious about her daughter's perspective on their transformed circumstances. Emma considered this seriously. "I was scared when we first moved," she admitted. "The barn was kind of creepy, and I missed having neighbors close by." She glued a miniature water barrel to her diorama before continuing. "But now it's cool. My friends think it's awesome that we live in an actual historical place. And you don't cry at night anymore when you think I'm asleep." The simple observation struck Morgan deeply. She hadn't realized her daughter had been aware of those desperate nights when the weight of their financial situation had overwhelmed her careful facade of optimism. "I'm sorry you heard that," she said softly. Emma shrugged with the straightforward acceptance of childhood. "It's okay. Dad messed everything up, but you fixed it. That's what matters." The unvarnished truth in her daughter's assessment brought both pain and pride. Morgan had indeed fixed their situation, though through means she could never have anticipated. What mattered wasn't the path, but the outcome: security for Emma, purpose for herself, and the preservation of history that might otherwise have been lost. A knock at the door revealed Lucas carrying building plans and a bakery box from the new cafe across the street. "Peace offering," he explained, indicating the pastries. "I need to discuss some last-minute changes to the exhibition layout." Morgan welcomed him in, clearing space on the kitchen table for the plans and the unexpected treat. Emma immediately investigated the bakery box, selecting a cinnamon roll with obvious approval before returning to her homework in the living room. "Apparently, our discovery inspired more than historical interest," Lucas commented, opening the box to reveal pastries decorated with frontier motifs. "The new bakery is doing an Outlaw gold cookie and a McBride mystery chocolate cake." Morgan laughed, the sound echoing in the partially finished space. "History becomes commerce." I suppose that's better than being forgotten entirely. As they reviewed the necessary exhibition adjustments, Morgan found herself reflecting on the croquis, unexpected partnership that had developed over the past months. Lucas's expertise and commitment had been crucial to the project's success, his practical knowledge balancing her administrative skills in a complementary way neither could have anticipated. "I've been meaning to thank you," she said as they finalized the changes. "That first day when I showed you this crumbling disaster of a building, you could have told me it was hopeless. Most contractors would have." Lucas considered this, his weathered face thoughtful in the cottage's soft lighting. "I've restored buildings for 25 years. Sometimes the ones that seem furthest gone are the ones most worth saving. They've survived this long for a reason." The observation struck Morgan as applicable to more than just architecture. Her own life had seemed beyond restoration after her divorce and the financial collapse that followed. Yet here she stood, rebuilding not just a historic structure, but her own future. Second chances come in unexpected forms, she reflected, for buildings and people both. The following morning brought another milestone as the conservation team completed the custom display case for the largest of the McBride treasure chests, the centerpiece of the exhibition and the artifact that had revealed the Outlaw's fortune. Most dramatically, Morgan watched as the conservators delicately positioned the chest, its lid open to reveal the gold coins and silver bars that had lain hidden for generations. "We've analyzed the metal composition," explained Dr. Leslie Rivera, the lead conservator. "It matches other authenticated currency from the period perfectly, no question about provenance." The scientific confirmation seemed almost superfluous to Morgan. Now, after months immersed in the McBride story, she had developed an almost personal connection to the outlaw and his cousin. Their voices across time had become familiar through the artifacts they had so carefully preserved. "Jesse never knew if his treasure would remain safe," she observed, studying the chest's handcrafted details. "He recorded his doubts in those letters alongside his determination. It makes him more human somehow." "That's the magic of primary sources," Dr. Rivera agreed. "They show historical figures as they really were, uncertain, hopeful, afraid, not as the caricatures they later became." This human dimension was what Morgan hoped visitors would connect with, not just the notorious outlaw aspects or historical importance, but the very human choices made in moments of crisis and uncertainty, choices that had consequences reaching far beyond what their makers could have imagined. As final preparations for the opening ceremony accelerated, Morgan found herself at the center of increasing public attention. Local newspapers featured profiles of the barn lady whose desperate purchase had uncovered historical treasure. Regional television stations requested interviews about the remarkable journey from financial crisis to historical discovery. Olivia had become adept at managing these requests, filtering them through the center's communication strategy while protecting Morgan from the most intrusive inquiries. "Channel 9 wants to do a feature on your divorce and financial collapse," Olivia reported with characteristic bluntness. "I told them we're focusing on the historical significance, not your bank statements." Morgan appreciated this protection. While her financial disaster was now an essential part of the discovery narrative, she had no desire to have the painful details of her ex-husband's deception and her subsequent bankruptcy examined as public entertainment. "The governor's advance team arrives tomorrow," Olivia continued, checking her tablet. "They'll need a complete walkthrough of the ceremony space and security briefing." As Morgan reviewed the final preparations, she realized how completely her life had transformed in just 3 months. The desperate single mother facing eviction had become a respected historical center director. The failing barn purchased with her last dollars had become a state-designated landmark with national historical significance. Yet amid this transformation, she recognized that the core elements remained consistent. The same determination that had driven her desperate barn purchase now fueled her leadership of the center. the same attention to detail that had characterized her former career now informed her approach to historical presentation. Her circumstances had changed dramatically, but her fundamental strengths had simply found new expression, redirected from survival to purpose in a way she could never have anticipated when standing before the crumbling barn at the county auction, clutching her last $1,800 like a lifeline. That evening, as twilight settled over Pinecrest, Morgan stood in the barn's front room, now the McBride exhibition hall, and watched as the final display cases were secured in place. Tomorrow would bring officials, media attention, and public recognition. But tonight, in the quiet of the nearly completed center, she took a moment to appreciate the journey that had brought her here. From the devastating end of her marriage to financial ruin, from desperate last-chance purchase to historical discovery, from the brink of homelessness to leading a prestigious institution, each painful step had somehow led precisely where she needed to be, though she could never have seen the path while walking it. The failing barn that had represented her last financial hope had revealed itself to be something far more valuable, a physical connection to a pivotal moment in history, a bridge between past and future, and the foundation for a second chance she could never have imagined. As she prepared to leave for the night, Morgan paused at the special display containing her crowbar, the ordinary tool that had pried up the floorboards and changed everything. Beside it, a simple plaque told, "Visitors, sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we have nothing left to lose." 1 year after the McBride Center's grand opening, Morgan Foster stood at the window of her office, watching as a group of fifth graders gathered on the lawn for a special educational program. The children clustered around interactive stations, where graduate fellows demonstrated frontier-era communication methods, from signal flags and cipher wheels to early telegraph systems. Their enthusiasm was visible even from a distance, hands raising eagerly to volunteer for each demonstration. The center had exceeded all expectations in its first year of operation. Visitor numbers had surpassed projections by nearly 50%. Research fellowship applications had flooded in from prestigious universities nationwide, and the educational programs had earned state recognition for innovation and historical engagement. What had begun as Morgan's desperate purchase of a failing barn had blossomed into an institution with growing national significance. "The Smithsonian curator just confirmed," Olivia announced, entering with her characteristic efficiency. "They're bringing the traveling Outlaws and Lawmen exhibition here next spring. Apparently, our artifacts have become a central context for understanding the evolution of frontier justice." Morgan smiled, still occasionally struck by the surreal evolution of her circumstances. From bankruptcy to hosting Smithsonian exhibitions, life took unexpected turns. "Speaking of unexpected," Olivia continued, checking her tablet, "the National Historic Preservation Trust called. They're presenting you with their annual Leadership Award at the gala in Washington next month. The official announcement goes out tomorrow." This news gave Morgan pause. Professional recognition had begun arriving with increasing frequency, speaking invitations, board appointments, media profiles, all stemming from her leadership of the center. Yet she never forgot that her visionary leadership, as one publication had described it, had begun with the most desperate of financial gambles. "Time to head downstairs," Olivia reminded her. "The symposium opens in 20 minutes, and everyone's expecting remarks from the executive director." The International Symposium on Frontier History and Preservation marked the center's 1-year anniversary, bringing together historians, archaeologists, and museum professionals to discuss the preservation and interpretation of Western artifacts. The 3-day event would feature presentations on the McBride treasure and its impact on outlaw historiography, as well as broader discussions about historical preservation in small communities. Morgan made her way through the center's beautifully restored corridors, now familiar pathways rather than the daunting damaged spaces she had first encountered. McBride Barn had been transformed from a deteriorating ruin into a vibrant institution, its rooms filled daily with researchers, students, and visitors. Yet subtle reminders of its darkest days remained, a section of damaged flooring preserved. Beneath protective glass, showing visitors the original discovery site. A photograph in the entry hall documenting the barn's condition at auction. The small display case containing the crowbar Morgan had used when first exploring the hidden tunnel. The main exhibition hall, once a crumbling structure with water-damaged timbers and peeling paint, now featured state-of-the-art display technology concealed within restored 1880s architectural elements. The room was filled to capacity for the symposium opening, with academic leaders from major universities sitting alongside frontier historians and preservation specialists. As Morgan approached the podium, she surveyed the assembled experts with quiet amazement at the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her opening remarks acknowledged both the historical significance of the McBride artifacts and the extraordinary circumstances of their discovery, weaving together the frontier narrative of outlaw adventures with the 21st century story of financial crisis and revelation. The McBride Center exists at the intersection of intention and circumstance, she noted, a theme she had often reflected upon. Jesse and Ezekiel McBride intentionally preserved these artifacts for future security, creating a hidden chamber to protect valuables they deemed too risky to transport, but too valuable to abandon. Yet the discovery of that hiding place required the precise circumstances that brought together a failing barn, a desperate single mother, and the revealing power of restoration to expose what had been hidden. Following her remarks, Professor Harlow presented the symposium's keynote address, detailing how the McBride artifacts had transformed scholarly understanding of frontier criminal networks. His presentation highlighted several major revelations that had emerged from the collection, detailed correspondence with corrupt officials that had facilitated the Central Pacific robbery, evidence of a sophisticated distribution network for stolen goods, private reflections on the ethical justifications outlaws used to rationalize their activities. These artifacts have fundamentally altered our understanding of how frontier criminal enterprises operated, Professor Harlow explained. What we once viewed as simply opportunistic theft, we now recognize as a sophisticated operation that shaped economic development across multiple territories. As the day's sessions progressed, Morgan moved between presentations, engaging with scholars and officials while maintaining the delicate balance between institutional leadership and academic participation. The center she directed had quickly established itself as more than a repository of historical artifacts. It had become a nexus for new scholarship that connected frontier history with contemporary understanding of economic development. During the afternoon break, Morgan encountered Lucas in the exhibition hall, where he was explaining the architectural restoration process to a group of preservation specialists. Their professional collaboration had evolved alongside a deepening personal connection, another unexpected development in Morgan's transformed life. The water damage actually revealed original construction techniques that had been covered by later renovations, Lucas was explaining, indicating the exposed beamwork that had been carefully preserved. Sometimes deterioration creates opportunities for discovery. This observation, so aligned with Morgan's own experience, caught her attention. Lucas noticed her presence and concluded his explanation, joining her as the group moved to the next exhibition area. "You've been quoted by preservation specialists," she noted with amusement. "Your restoration work here has made you something of a celebrity in historical architecture circles." Lucas smiled, acknowledging the change in his own professional standing. The McBride barn restoration had become a case study in preservation literature, and his firm now had a waiting list of historical properties seeking similar transformation. "Not bad for someone who initially told you this place might be beyond saving," he replied. "Fortunately, you didn't listen to expert opinion." Desperation has its advantages, Morgan observed. When you have nothing left to lose, impossible options suddenly seem worth trying. They walked together through the exhibition space now. Familiar territory that they had helped create from the crumbling ruin of a year earlier. Their conversation turned to upcoming projects, a new wing dedicated to women's experiences on the frontier, an expanded research library, enhanced visitor facilities in what had once been neighboring properties. The board approved the expansion. Budget this morning, Morgan informed him. Construction can begin next month, assuming the preservation permits come through on schedule. From trying to save a failing barn to planning a multi-million-dollar expansion, Lucas marveled. Jesse McBride could never have known that his hidden treasure would one day save a desperate single mother from financial ruin. Just as Morgan could never have predicted that her last chance investment would uncover historical treasure. That evening, as the symposium participants departed and the center returned to its normal operations, Morgan took a final walk through the gardens. The autumn light cast long shadows across paths that had been carefully reconstructed according to 19th century designs. Students from the local university were conducting an archaeological investigation of the former corral area, carefully sifting soil for artifacts that might reveal more about life during the McBride era. Lucas joined her, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his professional attention momentarily set aside as they enjoyed the peaceful conclusion of a successful event. The lieutenant governor mentioned expansion funding for next year, he said. Apparently, the center's economic impact on the region has caught the attention of state development officials. Morgan nodded. They're seeing what we've always understood, that preserving history isn't just about the past. It's about creating foundations for the future. As twilight deepened, they moved toward the barn's illuminated facade. The building that had once represented Morgan's financial rock bottom now stood as a beacon of historical significance and personal transformation, its warm lights welcoming visitors to discover both the story of Jesse McBride's outlaw fortune and the journey of a woman who had found unexpected purpose among the ruins of her former life. A year ago today, Lucas recalled, you were wondering if you'd made another terrible mistake accepting the director position. You told me you weren't sure you could handle the responsibility. Morgan smiled at the memory of her earlier doubts. I still have moments of disbelief that all of this grew from a desperate purchase with my last $1,800. Some investments can't be measured by conventional metrics, Lucas observed. Sometimes the true value of a decision only becomes clear in retrospect. As they reached the entrance to the center, now close to the public for the evening, Morgan paused to look back at the path they had traveled, not just the physical restoration of a historic building, but the rebuilding of a life from the ashes of financial disaster. When my marriage ended and I discovered the extent of our financial problems, I thought my life was over, she said quietly. Every path forward seemed to lead to greater loss. Buying this barn was an act of desperation, not wisdom. Yet here we are, Lucas replied, gesturing to the beautifully restored building and the thriving historical center it housed. Here we are, Morgan agreed. Proof that endings sometimes conceal beginnings we couldn't have imagined. As they entered the center, the security lights illuminated the main exhibition hall, where the McBride treasure was displayed alongside the crowbar that had pried up the floorboards to reveal it. The juxtaposition seemed to Morgan a perfect metaphor for her journey, the valuable and the ordinary, crisis and opportunity, desperation and discovery, all intertwined in ways that defied conventional understanding. The failing barn she had purchased with her last dollars had yielded treasure far beyond financial value. The desperate decision made at the edge of bankruptcy had opened doors she never knew existed. The journey that had begun in tears of desperation had led to purpose and fulfillment she could never have foreseen. In the quiet of the center she now directed, surrounded by history preserved through her unlikely discovery, Morgan Foster understood. That her greatest contribution might not be the artifact she had found, but the story of resilience they had enabled her to write. Her journey represented proof that even in our darkest moments, unseen possibilities wake just beneath the surface, ready to be revealed by those courageous or desperate enough to break through the floorboards of conventional thinking and look deeper. As new visitors arrived each day to learn about Jesse McBride's outlaw exploits and Ezekiel's courage in preserving historical artifacts, they also encountered Morgan's story of transformation, a living testament to the power of perseverance. In the face of apparent failure and the extraordinary potential hidden within ordinary circumstances, waiting for the right moment to emerge from darkness into light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.